Morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for attending this session on assessment. I must admit, I'm pleasantly surprised at the interest in this topic. I hope that you come away with a better understanding of how the tests that we give relate to the state standards and what the scores actually mean. How they might be used or maybe not used in your district. I am Phil Wilson. I'm the Assistant Director for Assessment in the Office of Educational Accountability. And you are, let's see, in this room, do we have any district assessment coordinators if you're that? Great, okay, so you may actually know everything I'm going to say. So if I misstate something, let me know, or if something's not clear, please clarify. Let's see, how about a school or district administrator? Any administrators? Okay. Great, okay, thanks. How about a CSET staff? CSET staff. Okay, and other school or district staff? Okay, thank you. What I plan to do for this session, if it's all right with you, I'm going to kind of read through my notes for each slide. And I think that'll take me about 25 minutes. And then that'll give us about 15 or 20 minutes for questions or discussion. Does that seem okay to you? I think that'll still allow us plenty of interaction. And if I do, but if I'm on a slide and something's not clear, please feel free to stop me. So we're going to go through these topics. We'll do a quick overview of the student assessment system. We'll look at how the assessments measure the standards. We're going to use the forward exam and the Wisconsin math standards as an example. We'll also discuss a little bit about how items are developed and reviewed before they actually get used on tests, how we report results, and finally, what's new for the 24 assessments. These exams are part of the Wisconsin student assessment system. Additional assessments administered in your districts may include access for ELLs for English learners, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, for selected schools, assessments selected by your district or school, and of course, teacher-made assessments. We encourage the strategic use of assessment, including local benchmark assessments and formative assessment practices. So a quick quiz. The forward exam is administered in what grade levels in Wisconsin? 3 through 10. Thank you. Yes, excellent. And how about dynamic learning maps? That's the alternate assessment. 3 through 11. Yes, excellent. Thank you. Pre-ACT secure, that was new last year. 9 and 10, and ACT, of course, grade 11. Excellent. All right, we passed the first quiz. Data from statewide assessments can be used for a variety of purposes. The assessment data from the statewide assessments provide information that's most useful when considering big picture questions like those on this slide. However, the bottom line is that the assessment system is intended to support learning for all students. Educators should consider the statewide assessment data in the context of other available data. The Wisconsin academic standards specify what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. They serve as goals for teaching and learning and define for students, parents, educators, and citizens what students should have learned at each grade level or grade band. The forward exam is designed to gauge how well students are doing in relation to the Wisconsin standards. All questions on the forward exam are linked directly to a standard for each tested grade level and content area. The exam provides a broad measure of achievement that should be used along with local measures, such as report cards, school-wide assessments, grades, and other information about an individual student's progress in school. Students receive a score based on their performance in each content area. Federal law requires that states must implement assessments in mathematics, reading or language arts, and science for all public school students. And the tests must be aligned with the state standards and provide information on whether a student is attaining those standards and performing at grade level. So the tests then are designed and items or test questions are developed specifically to address student knowledge of the Wisconsin standards. We develop a test plan or blueprint, and we make the blueprint available on our website. The blueprint guides test construction and item development. Every test question is designed to measure student knowledge of a particular standard. Let's take a look at mathematics for an example of how this works. So here's a section from the Wisconsin Mathematics Standards. We can look at this and see that for grades K through 5, there are a number of conceptual categories. For example, operations and algebraic thinking, number and operations in base 10, measurement and data. And some of these categories go all the way from K through high school, like geometry, mathematical thinking. Let's take a look at measurement and data. So this is what a section of the test blueprint would look like. Again, you can see this on our website. This is the test blueprint for grade 3 mathematics, specifically for this measurement and data reporting category. You can see that on the forward exam, about 10 to 12 points will be allocated for this particular topic. Going back to the Wisconsin math standards, a little bit of nomenclature here. This slide shows how the mathematics standards are coded. In this example, we can see the M for math, 3 for grade 3, OA is the domain that is operations and algebraic thinking, and A is the cluster statement, and 1 would be the particular standard. Now, if we look at a standard in our math standards, this is standard 3 for measurement and data. If we unpack that notation, we see M for math, 3 for grade 3, MD for measurement and data, B is the cluster, represent and interpret data, and 3 is standard 3. Standard 3 specifically is draw a scaled picture graph and a scaled bar graph to represent a data set with several categories. Solve 1 and 2 step, how many more and how many less problems using information presented in scaled bar graphs. For example, draw a bar graph in which each square in the bar graph might represent 5 pets. So let's take a look at what an item might look like that's assessing that standard. I'm going to show you a sample item that's in the practice test that's on our website. So when you go to the practice test, the first thing you'll see is this kind of information about the item. This is item number 12 in the 3rd grade math test. It's aligned to this specific standard. You can see the math grade 3, measurement and data, cluster B, standard 3. And the depth of knowledge for this item I'm going to show you is a 1. Depth of knowledge, you may be familiar with, it's a way of talking about the cognitive complexity or the intellectual demand of an item. It's not the same as difficulty. Something can involve cognitive complexity but not be difficult, or could be not cognitively complex but be difficult. For example, if a student hasn't covered it yet in class. So number 4, extended thinking is the type of thing that is done more often in the classroom and in classroom assessments. It's not something that's typically done in a standardized sit down and take the test like the forward exam. In the forward exam, you're going to see more items that are DOK 1 or 2 or maybe 3 items. So the item that we're going to look at is a DOK 1, the application of a procedure. And here's the item. On the actual test, this item would all be on 1 page. I've split it into 2 parts just so it's easier for us to see. So this is the first part of the item. Some students voted on their favorite type of animal. The results of the vote are shown in the table. So let's take a look at that first one. So the type of animal, birds, got 4 votes. Cats 12, dogs 20, rabbits 8. And the item says complete the bar graph to show the results from the table. Again, this would all be on one page for the student. Here's what the student would be faced with. Have to complete this bar graph to represent the numbers in that table. So you can see this is just asking the student to apply a procedure. How do I create a bar graph when I'm given a data set? So for this example, when we look at birds, what would we have to do to complete this item? Yes, thank you. We'd have to shade in the column for birds up to the 4. Now, in the sample test, it also provides an answer key for all of the items. And the answer key contains some of the information that we talked about. For example, what standard is it aligned to? What's the cognitive complexity of the item? It's also going to tell us how many points the item is worth and what's the right answer. It may also tell us what does the student need to do to get full credit for the items. And for multiple choice items, it's going to tell us for each distractor or each wrong answer, what's the purpose of that wrong answer? What is that wrong answer testing? So usually the wrong answers are testing whether the student has a misconception about the topic of the question. Okay, so that's what an item would look like. So when we generate these items, how do we know that they work? How do we know that they're fair, that they're good items? So all the new items we develop are reviewed by DPI assessment and content staff, and also educator panels. I'm going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about how you or people from your district can be involved in reviewing items before they are used on the forward exam. So items that pass this educator review are field tested on the exam. Field testing means that students will take these items. The students don't know that these items are not counted toward their score. But we get the data then back from the exam. It's not part of the student's score, but we can examine this data and see if the item statistically is performing the way that it should. And if it is, we can use it on the operational test. And if it's not, it will never make it to the operational test. So here's some examples of the types of data we look at after field testing. There are other data that we look at, but this gives you a flavor for the kinds of things we check. So p-values are the probability that a student answered the question correctly. 0.2 means 20% of students answered correctly. 0.9 means 90% of students answered correctly. So which of those would be an easier item? The 0.2 or the 0.9? So 20% answered correctly or 90%?
90%.
Yes, thank you. 90% answered correctly. That's an easier question. Does that belong on the exam? It might. It depends. It could still be a good item, something important to measure. The fact that everybody knows it doesn't mean it shouldn't be on the test. However, in general, if items are either too easy or too hard, we don't put them on the test. We also look at something called the point by serial correlation for the distractors. The distractors, remember, are the wrong answer choices. So if students do well on the test otherwise, but they tend to pick this wrong distractor, then we think there's something wrong with that item. That wrong distractor is too attractive to students who otherwise seem to really know their subject, like math. We also look at differential item functioning. In differential item functioning, we look at different student demographic groups or gender or English learner status or disability status. And we want to see if students who otherwise seem to have the same ability on the test answer a particular question similarly. If we find that one group of students who appears to have the same general ability on the test is getting a question wrong or right, more often than other groups, that sets a flag off, and we take a look at that question and see if there's something about that question that may be advantaging or disadvantaging any particular group of students. And it's likely that the question will not make it onto the operational test. We also look at questions that students skip over. If a lot of students are skipping a question, probably not a good question. It won't make it to the test. So how are you doing so far? Any questions so far on this? Thanks. Let's turn next to reporting. So we looked at the standards. We've talked about how the assessments are designed to assess specific standards. Now, how do we report this information? We do report it in a variety of places. WISEdash is the big one. WISEdash is amazing. It's a wonderful resource. We have both public and secure reporting. Also, each assessment vendor has their own portal for reporting. Oftentimes, results are available on the vendor portals before they're available in WISEdash. We also have individual student reports, and we have the your district student information systems. The forward exam individual student report is getting a redesign this year. We're hoping that it's going to be more parent friendly. So here's an example. This is a mock-up. We're not finished with everything yet. But note that student performance is reported in terms of performance levels and percentile ranks. On this form, we're using level 1, 2, 3, 4 because we haven't yet nailed down what we're going to call those levels. We had some conversations about using more asset-based terminology. The thinking being that terms like below basic don't encourage conversations about student growth. And so we did a survey. We got 800 responses to the survey about your preferences for what we should call these 4 performance levels. So we're just finalizing what these names will be. When we have that done, then that's what you'll see on the student report. On page 2 of the report, there are also some changes. We can see here that student performance is reported in terms of scale scores. In English, language, arts, and mathematics, the scales will change. That's why you see X's instead of numbers on this sample. We don't yet know what those numbers are going to be. And in reading and writing, we will also be giving a scale score. This is new. So that means that from 2024 and going forward, you'll be able to compare the scale score in reading specifically across time for a student or for students. That wasn't possible before. So we made a few changes to the test. We beefed up the reading test a little bit so that we can have more confidence that those scores will mean the same thing over time. It's still not as big as the whole ELA test. So there's a little more uncertainty just for the reading section, but it's there as a resource. So if we look at scale scores, as you know, the forward exam uses a single vertical scale for each content area. This is the old scale. We don't yet know the numbers for the new scale, but on the old scale in math, it went from 360, grade 3, to 890 in grade 8. But when we think about scale scores, if I tell you a student had a scale score of 543, what does that mean? Is that a good score? It's not enough information, is it? You need to know more. For example, what grade is the student in? Or what did they get last year? Another thing you might be interested in is, well, how does that score compare to the scores of other students? So we do report percentile ranks. That grade of 543 last year would have been a percentile rank of 40, which means that it's as good as or better than 40% of the other third graders who took the test that year. It also means that 60% of the students scored higher. So the results of this scenario answer the question, how well did the student perform in comparison to their peers? Yearly percentile tables show the correlation between scale score ranges and percentile rank for each content and grade level. Reporting results in terms of percentiles, however, doesn't provide information on whether students are meeting grade level expectations. Rank ordering the student scores doesn't reflect the amount of knowledge and skills demonstrated by the student on the test. To do that, we have performance categories. Typically, educators and assessment professionals have made recommendations to the state superintendent to establish these performance levels. The most common process for arriving at these recommendations involves a standard setting. We will be doing some standard settings this year, and I'll talk more about that. The educators in these standard settings review the academic standards. They review the descriptions of what students can do at each performance level. They look at actual test items. The performance levels help answer the question, how does this student's learning compare to the expectations at their grade level? So the percentile ranks associated with a particular scale score may change from year to year. But the cut scores associated with the performance levels will change only when there's a new standard setting. Summing up the previous two slides, the percentile ranks compare a student's score to the scores of other students in the same grade and the same year, while the performance levels compare a student's score to grade level expectations in the academic standards. This example is from last year's board exam mathematics test, grade 3. The numbers may be different after the standard setting this year. Remember, in the standard setting, educator panels will look at the test items and the academic standards, and they won't be looking at how students compare to one another when they set the cut scores. Okay, so we've walked through standards, item development, how we report scores. Now we're entering the last part of the presentation for this morning. What's new for 2024? Let's see what's coming up. One thing that I'm very excited about, and that might be of particular interest to some of you in the group, is that we are working on, with the EdFi Alliance, on standardizing the data communication between the vendor and the district and DPI. We're working with the DPI collections team and the assessment vendors on a better way to exchange student demographics and assessment information for the forward exam, pre-ACT and ACT secure, pre-ACT secure, sorry. We're working with a few districts to conduct a pilot this spring. Is anybody here from a district that's conducting an EdFi pilot by any chance? Yes, okay. Well, thank you. So for your district will still do all of the regular processes. And the only extra work will be that you'll also receive a student data file from the vendor to compare with your enrollments throughout the test window. We're interested in determining whether districts and choice program schools are keeping WISE data information complete and up to date throughout the test window. The outcome goal of this project is to have a single place, WISE data, where demographics and enrollments are updated so that DPI can share these directly with the vendors. So the benefit of that is going to be that we'll have more accurate data. We may be able to speed up the reporting timeline. And for districts, should be less work, because if you just keep the data accurate in your SIS, we'll take care of the rest. Some changes to the forward exam. In addition to what we've already talked about, we removed the listening session from the forward exam. We found that classroom teachers weren't really using that information to look at their curriculum and instruction. And so we were able to shorten the exam by 1 session. So now the ELA exam is 3 sessions instead of 4. We also found that the long write, the text dependent analysis item was did not really seem to be resonating with people in schools. And so we've removed that and replaced it with two short write items. We think that these short write items will be more engaging for students and also better reflect practices in the classroom. As I mentioned, we will be doing standard settings in June and July. We'll conduct a standard setting for the forward exam in June. We'll also conduct a standard setting for the ACT in July. We'll also reset the cut scores for the pre-ACT secure. So all of those tests, board exam, pre-ACT secure, and ACT, will have new cut scores for reporting in 2024. That means that the proficiency rates in 2024 that we report will most likely not be comparable to the rates that we reported prior to now. Okay, so that's an important point. If you are using changes in proficiency rates or something to look at your curriculum, you'll have to do something a little differently this year. The standard settings also affect the reporting timeline a little bit because we can't report final data until the standard settings are complete. We think that will push back some reporting a little bit. So district reports from Data Recognition Corporation, DRC, should be available in late July for the forward exam. Individual student reports for the ACT are always available 5 to 8 weeks after test administration. And district reports should be available in June in the ACT vendor portal. For the pre-ACT secure, individual student reports will be available in May. School and district reports should be available in late May, the vendor portal. And WISEdash for district reports most likely be available in late August at the earliest. So late August or September for WISEdash for districts. And then the public release would be most likely sometime in mid to late October. Something like that. I mentioned that there are opportunities for educators from your districts, and maybe some of you in this room might be interested in this, or maybe you could pass this along. It's really vitally important for us that we have good participation in activities like these. Range finding is an activity where we take these new writing items, we take the actual student responses, and we see how student answered the items. And that lets us find out what's a typical answer, what's a really good answer, what's an answer that maybe leaves a little something on the table. And that helps us to get our scoring guides more exact. So when we write an item, we kind of expect the kinds of answers we're going to get, but we don't really know until students actually answer the question. And that's when we finalize the scoring guides. So we're inviting educators to come in and help us review those sample student responses and get those scoring guides set so that the items will be scored the way we want them scored here in Wisconsin. We also have the standard settings come up that I mentioned. At the standard settings, educators will be trained, review the standards, review what do we mean by a proficient student in third grade in math? What does that look like? To review the actual items from the test booklets, and then set, okay, here's where I think a just proficient student would be, or an advanced student. And this will take place over several rounds, where there will be discussion in between each round, and maybe looking at some data too, to just see, okay, if we set the cut score here, what does that look like? How many students will be proficient if we do that? So that's a really important activity, because the only way to do that really is to include educator judgment to set those cut scores. Those recommended cut scores will go to the state superintendent, and they may be adjusted up or down a little bit depending on articulating across grade levels or other things. But that's how that's going to work for the forward exam in June. And a similar process for the ACT in July. And the third opportunity for the forward exam, we've already talked about a little bit, is item review. And that's an opportunity for educators to come in and actually look at new items. And educators really get in there and look at the items in detail and make sure this item is measuring what we say it's measuring. It's got the vocabulary that's appropriate for the grade level. It's something that we teach. It's not too tricky. It's a good item. If educators don't like the item, it doesn't make it past item review. We have found that educators who participate in this have told us many, many times they have also benefited from their participation because they get to work with educators from around the state. And so that broadens the perspective, and also get to dig into the standards a little bit more and actually look at how this test works. So I would encourage you to consider these opportunities or to share these with your staff in your district. So I've gone through all the slides, and we do have time for questions, I think, right? So these are the contact people. This is our team. This is the assessment team. If you have any questions, if you have suggestions, if you have comments, if you want to see us do something differently, or if you like what we're doing, please contact the person that you see on the slide. And one thing I'm very proud of about our team is that when you contact us, you will get a live person and you'll be able to talk to the person who actually administers that program. So at this point, I'll open it up for any questions or comments. Please do scan the QR code and leave comments about this session. We heard that people wanted a session on assessment at WISEData. I'm not sure I hit the mark. So if you have some suggestions, or if you like what you saw, or you want us to do this or something different next year, please let us know so that we can do that. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions or comments or anything, I would be happy to discuss it. Yes.
Can you give a little context around why the change in the cut scores are happening now?
Yes, the question is, why is the change in the cut scores happening now? Okay, excellent question. So typically, we will change the cut scores if the standards change. And then we change the assessment to measure those new standards. So if there's a change in the assessment, so that those scores won't be the same thing, then we need to reset the cut scores so that we're sure that the proficient or advanced means what we need it to mean on the new test. So we have revised the mathematics standards and the English language arts standards a few years ago. Typically, we like to then revise the test to reflect those new standards between 2 to 4 years after the standards are revised. So the mathematics test for forward was changed to more closely reflect the standards, and the ELA test has some changes for the standards and also that we talked about. And since we are resetting cut scores for the forward exam, we want to make sure that across the grades from 3 to 11, we have some kind of rational articulation of proficiency rates. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Yes. Good question. Any discussion about the Act 20 required screener being part of WISEdash? I don't have an answer for you on whether it will be. There has been some discussion. We do have a page on our DPI website that's devoted to Act 20. Have you seen it? Yeah. So I know there's FAQs on that. I know there's a mailbox on that where people can ask questions. Yeah, it's not updated. as frequently as we may like. I know that we're still in the procurement process for that screener. I think since it will be a screener that everyone's required to use, it could make sense to include that in WISEdash, but I think that's, you have it, yeah.
For the 24-25 school year, it will be a paper submission. So it's not going to be electronically submitted in the WISE data portal or anything for the next school year. So I'm not sure how that's going to impact the WISEdash process once it is collected. But we do understand that it is moving faster at the district level than at the state level. Isn't that the story of our, agency? But we are aware of that feedback and those concerns and those questions. So our teams are looking into it. We just don't have an answer for this conference, unfortunately. Yep, so for 24-25, the Act 20 data collection is not going to be submitted in WISE Data Portal the way that all your other data is. It's going to be, we call it like I think that the phrasing is like a hand collection. Basically, it's going to be submitted in some other format other than in WISE Data Portal. So whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's a Qualtrics survey where you submit that information, that I don't think has been established yet, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone at least was aware that it's not going to be in WISE Data Portal for 24-25.
And between you and lunch. Any other questions? Where can we find this presentation?
If you go to our DPI website and in the top right hand corner, there's a search bar. If you put WISE Data Conference, it'll take you to the WISE Data Conference landing page. And if you scroll a little bit down, you'll see all of the presentations in a PDF format available for you to follow along during the presentations or to use after the fact once the sessions are done. The recordings will also be available on that website after they've been translated and transcribed and everything. So that might take a little bit of time, but all of these are being recorded and they will be available on that same website at some point in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, if this works the way we want it to, that should make that work. Sorry, the question was, does the EdFi API mean that at the district level, I don't have to input all the student information into the vendor portal? So as you know, we do a roster file for the vendor, but then after that, we do that roster file. If there are any changes, anything new, you have to do that yourself in the district level. So using the EdFi API, you wouldn't have to do that second step anymore. If it works. Yes.
I work at the Wisconsin School for the Deaf, and all the forward test results go to the school district. Not everybody shares them with us. How do we go about getting our forward test reports?
That is a good question. I think that's something that maybe you and I could discuss, or we could discuss that with the forward exam people about how those reports get sent out. If you can leave me your contact information, we'll get back to you. So the question was for the Wisconsin School for the Deaf, where student results get sent to the student's home school or district, how does the Wisconsin School for the Deaf get those reports? And we'll work on it. Anything else? Yes. Yes, let me see. So yes, forward exam should be July in the vendor portal. Individual student reports for ACT 5 to 8 weeks after they take the test. District reports in June in the vendor portal. Pre-ACT, individual student reports in May. District reports in late May, the vendor portal. WISEdash for districts probably won't be before the end of August. All right, thank you so much for attending this presentation. I've enjoyed sharing this space with you. And I hope you have a good rest of the conference.